June 12th, 2012. The Oklahoma City Thunder have put the finishing touches on a convincing 105-94 victory over the Miami Heat in Game 1 of the NBA Finals. Just 1 month after being named Sixth Man of the Year, a 22-year-old James Harden had an off night with just 5 points. But it didn't matter. His two young All-NBA teammates picked him up, and the Thunder were in the driver's seat. May 24th, 2018. The Houston Rockets have outlasted in every sense of the word the Golden State Warriors. A true slugfest of a battle in Game 5 of the West Finals saw the Rockets hold on for a 98-94 win. Just 1 month later, 28-year-old James Harden would be crowned NBA MVP after a sparkling season, an award he had coveted for years. June 1st, 2021. Alongside Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, James Harden and his two mates have just put the Boston Celtics out of their misery, showing at long last the sense of inevitability that is associated with a roster consisting of 3 all-time great scorers of the basketball. Do these Brooklyn Nets have faults? Sure, but with a clean bill of health acquired at just the right time, those faults don't really matter. Now, what if I told you that none of those 3 scenarios I outlined ended in a championship for one James Harden? What if, despite being one of the 75 greatest players in NBA history, a player at his peak compared to Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, James Harden never reaches the promised land in the NBA? Whether it's his fault or not, James Harden's career has been one long what if. James Harden was drafted 3rd overall by the OKC Thunder in 2009. In case you're ever curious about a blueprint for rebuilding, consider the Sonics Thunder franchise, who selected Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, then James Harden in consecutive years at the top of the draft. Toss in Serge Ibaka and Jeff Green, who was slightly less important, and you've got yourself a core to make every other franchise green with envy. Despite being very green themselves, the Thunder would improve in win percentage year over year for the next 3 seasons, becoming a true contender way ahead of schedule. And they weren't a flash in the pan, as after losing to the Dirk Nowitzki World Tour of Destruction in the West Finals in 2011, OKC would sport a 47-19 record in the lockout-shortened 11-12 season, good for 2nd in the West. Now, as time has waned, history has slightly rewritten the credentials of these Thunder, making them out to be, a young team without expectation. But if we rewind, we can see that there were indeed expectations, and they were sky high. One outlet suggested prior to the season that anything short of a finals berth would be a failure for OKC. Another posited accurately that the Heat and Thunder would meet in the finals, and that Durant would be regular season MVP. Man, my guy almost nailed that one. After rolling through a murderer's row of opponents in the West, the Dirk Mavs, Kobe Lakers, and Duncan Spurs, the Thunder would clinch a spot in the finals in 2012, becoming one of the youngest teams to ever do so. Well, okay, fine, so they were in fact super young, but trust me, they were ready. At age 22, James Harden was the NBA's 6th Man of the Year after averaging a shade under 17 points a game on the finest efficiency numbers of his career. At age 23, Russell Westbrook was both an All-Star and named All-NBA 2nd team for the 2nd straight season. And finally, at age 23, Kevin Durant had won his 3rd straight scoring title, was runner-up for MVP for the 2nd time in 3 years, and was named All-NBA 1st team for the 3rd straight season. Oh, and for good measure, 22-year-old Serge Ibaka led the league in blocks by a mile, was runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year, and was all-defensive 1st team. This was no ordinary young roster. Bolstered by their treacherous run through the West, OKC came into the 2012 finals as runaway favorites. I mean, look at those betting odds. I don't personally understand them, but Vegas never lies, man. In addition, the Thunder were narratively looked at as favorites by many due to on-paper advantages such as size and late-game strategy. I mean, even the great prognosticator Stephen A. Smith put his stamp of approval on the Thunder.
OKC collectively as a unit is a better team than the Miami Heat, and I suspect they'll take Miami out in 6 games.
Okay, in hindsight, that may have actually been a curse. OKC lived up to their billing in Game 1, clawing back in the second half to beat Miami by 11 points. James Harden had his most pedestrian outing of the playoffs, but Kevin Durant dropped 36 points in a monster performance. Harden, Durant, Westbrook would combine for 80 points on 29 of 59 shooting in Game 2, but the Heat were narrowly able to escape with the win, stealing back home court advantage. As the series shifted back to South Beach, there was a sense of impending doom as the Heat prepared for 3 straight home games. Games 3 and 4 of the series would be tight as Miami would win both by just 6 points, before closing out the Thunder with a double-digit victory in a finals-clinching Game 5. While LeBron James was finally being crowned, James Harden underwhelmed greatly in his first finals appearance, dipping well below his season averages. Despite the finals result, however, most NBA people were convinced that OKC was a dynasty in the making, and that re-signing James Harden in the offseason would not be an issue. As the story goes, Harden felt as though he'd sacrificed a lot in accepting a bench role in OKC, so also accepting less money to stick around wasn't something he was willing to do. The Thunder meanwhile didn't want to pay into the luxury tax to keep both Harden and Serge Ibaka on big contracts, freaking Clay Bennett, and on October 27, 2012, James Harden was traded to the Houston Rockets, leaving behind a potential dynasty and leaving us to forever ask, what if James Harden was never traded by the Oklahoma City Thunder? While OKC had plans to keep Harden in his super bench role, Rockets GM Daryl Morey believed he had just acquired a franchise cornerstone in the trade. Harden lived up to that billing immediately, as he put the NBA on notice with a 37-point, 12-assist debut for the Rockets in 2012. He'd make his first ever All-Star game, as well was named All-NBA for the first time in Season 1 in Houston, leading them to the playoffs for the first time in 4 seasons too, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the course of James Harden's first 6 seasons in Houston, well, he'd do all sorts of damage. Per game averages of 28 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists, 6 All-Star appearances, 4 first-team All-NBA selections, 1 MVP, 1 scoring title, and 1 assist title. You know, just light work or whatever. As he was establishing himself as a clear top 5 player in the NBA, Morey and the Rockets front office would flank Harden with a rotating cast of supporting pieces. Jeremy Lin, Chandler Parsons, Dwight Howard, Trevor Ariza, Eric Gordon, never quite finding the correct blend. In large part to a lacking crew around him, Harden was able to lead the Rockets to just 3 playoff series wins in 5 seasons to begin his Houston tenure, despite always maintaining strong individual playoff numbers. That all changed in June of 2017, however, as Daryl Morey once again went big game fishing in an attempt to keep pace with the loaded Warriors. The Rockets traded for 9-time All-Star Chris Paul. Morey would say of the move at the time, quote, "It's a weapons race in the NBA and you're either in the weapons race or on the sidelines. This gives us a real shot to chase the juggernaut teams that are out there. This puts us right there with them." Daryl, ever the optimist. Twitter, as per usual, was less optimistic about the Harden-Paul fit, but that of course didn't matter. Morey was vindicated as in 2017-18, the Rockets and their new dynamic duo would soar to a 65-17 record, booking home court advantage throughout the playoffs. Harden, by the way, 35-9 per game en route to finally winning his first MVP. Just, you know, basically a perfect season. What could go wrong? Houston was able to carry the momentum created in the regular season into the playoffs, as they were able to cruise past Minnesota in 5 games, then the Utah Jazz in 5 games, setting the table for a matchup with Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and the Golden State Warriors. I'll note here that the Warriors had beaten the Rockets in 2 of the previous 3 seasons in the playoffs, and both of those series came prior to Durant arriving in the Bay. This scenario is exactly why Chris Paul was acquired by Houston. Like Daryl Morey said, the NBA is an arms race, and the Rockets had entered a battle with Tony Stark. The first 4 games of the series lived up to the billing of a true heavyweight battle between the teams, as we found ourselves tied up at 2 games apiece. Both Harden and Paul were locked in, with the former averaging 36-6, the latter at 27-4. Then Game 5 happened. The 5th installment of the 2018 West Finals between the Rockets and Warriors was a true slugfest, with both teams combining to shoot just 41% from the field, with both teams scoring under 100 points. In a pivotal third quarter sequence, Chris Paul would nail 3 consecutive threes to keep the Rockets afloat, including a truly ridiculous make over Steph Curry, followed by a sassy shimmy in the face of the 2-time MVP. Houston would overcome a small fourth quarter deficit to hold on for an ugly 98-94 win. But where they'd won this battle, it cost them the war.
Well, they might have to drag him because you know he's not going to come off the court. But he is hurt right now. limping, walking gingerly and slowly.
CP3 was ruled out with an injured hamstring prior to Game 6 back in Golden State, leaving many to wonder if James Harden could do the unthinkable and close out the Warriors without his second in command. Klay Thompson would go nuclear for the Warriors, as Golden State overcame a 17-point deficit and ran Houston off the court, leading to one final shot at glory for the Harden Rockets. Not good. That was the report on the morning of Game 7 with regards to Chris Paul's hamstring. The Rockets' secondary star would miss the gargantuan series-deciding game. Houston at one point in the contest would miss 27 consecutive threes in a truly historic collapse. Golden State would erase a 15-point deficit and cruise to a win and yet another spot in the NBA Finals. James Harden once again played at an elite level individually in the playoffs, and specifically in the 2018 West Finals, but he was unable to lift his Rockets past the Dynasty Warriors in consecutive closeout games without his right-hand man. With a lackluster Cleveland Cavaliers team waiting in the finals, it's logical to infer that Houston would have found themselves champions in 2018 instead of the Warriors. What if Chris Paul never got hurt in the 2018 Western Conference Finals? The Rockets would flame out in the second round of the playoffs in 2019, getting eliminated by the Warriors for the fourth time in 5 years. It's worth noting that at this point, Harden was completely in his bag individually, scoring 36 points a game in 2018-19. After two ultimately unsuccessful runs, on July 11th, 2019, Chris Paul was traded by the Rockets along with 2 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps to OKC in exchange for Russell Westbrook. James and Russ, man, reunited, and it feels... Nope, it actually didn't feel very good. Both players amassed their usual monster numbers during the regular season, but Houston would get bounced with ease by the Lakers in the second round of the bubble playoffs. Both Mike D'Antoni and Daryl Morey left the Rockets organization shortly thereafter, with the latter reportedly exiting Houston because he anticipated that James Harden too would want out. Once again, great intuition from Daryl Morey. By November of 2020, Harden had indicated to Westbrook that he wanted to be traded, specifically to the Brooklyn Nets. Within a week, it was widely known across the league that Harden wanted out, and reports began to bubble that Houston and Brooklyn were nearing a trade. That potential trade got hung up, however, leading to James Harden arriving to Rockets training camp late and disgruntled. At one point, he even threw a ball angrily at young Jayshawn Tate. On January 14th, 2021, Harden's demand was finally placated, as he was traded to the Brooklyn Nets after roughly 2 months of public posturing from both sides. Harden was reunited, this time with Kevin Durant, and that pair was joined by Kyrie Irving, creating a sizable talent advantage on paper over every other NBA team. Sizable talent advantage. That was a very polite way of understating things. Harden would battle injury throughout the season after arriving in Brooklyn, playing in just 36 games. However, he was spectacular, putting up more elite individual numbers. Amazingly, the Nets' big three of Harden, Durant, Irving would play just 8 games together, a total of 202 minutes during the 2020-21 regular season. But that didn't really matter. All 3 phenoms were healthy as the 2021 playoffs rolled around, and despite the lack of time spent on court together, they were scintillating. Brooklyn would roll all over the Boston Celtics in 5 games, with each of their wins coming by double figures. And here's some proof of just how special the Nets' big three was. I mean, they all got their numbers. Wow. Kyrie Irving would say following the series, quote, "This doesn't happen too often kind of in our culture, in our history, where 3 of the best scorers to ever play the game are on one team." Harden, meanwhile, loved the vibes, saying, quote, "We were just happy to be on the court together, so it's great to get one series out of the way." At this moment in time, the NBA world collectively was terrified of this Brooklyn Nets team, as they truly looked unstoppable, with one media outlet stating, "Barring injury, beating them 4 times in 7 tries is shaping up to be one of the tallest tasks in NBA history." Whoops. Just 43 seconds into the Nets' second round series against the Milwaukee Bucks, James Harden re-injured his hamstring, an injury which had cost him time in the regular season. The exact same injury, by the way, that Chris Paul suffered in 2018, costing James Harden a chance at, well, you know what? Never mind. Even without Harden, though, Durant and Irving would lead Brooklyn to decisive victories in games 1 and 2. However, Chris Middleton exploded in game 3 to help save the Bucks' season. Prior to game 4, with the Nets up 2-1 in the series, head coach Steve Nash said Harden's injured hamstring was, quote, "progressing well, but he would be sidelined once again." And this is where disaster struck. During Game 4, Kyrie Irving would land awkwardly on Giannis, brutally turning his ankle, sidelining him for the remainder of the game and the remainder of the series. As a result, James Harden would return to the court in Game 5, with the series tied 2 games apiece, but he was visibly still hurt, and by his standards, pretty ineffective in Games 5 through 7 of the series. In a wildly dramatic Game 7, Kevin Durant would play all 48 minutes of regulation, scoring 48 points, including what appeared to be a series-clinching three-pointer with 1 second remaining, only to have that shot ruled a 2, as his foot was painfully on the line. Despite being literal inches away, the Nets would eventually lose in overtime. The Bucks would march to an NBA championship, James Harden would once again fall short, and we were left with yet another what if injuries didn't decimate the 2021 Brooklyn Nets. Oh, and also what if Kevin Durant's shoes were like half a size smaller. I didn't want to bring this up originally since the injuries are the bigger what if in my opinion, but the Nets were still this close to advancing in the playoffs. It's like a 2-for-1 what if in James Harden's career. Nearly 1 year to the day of when James Harden pushed his way out of Houston, the bearded superstar dipped back into his playbook and did nearly the exact same thing to Brooklyn. First, we had a report in early 2022 of a general sense of dissatisfaction from Harden with his situation in Brooklyn. Shortly thereafter, in a truly bizarre turn of events, James Harden publicly requested a trade to the Philadelphia 76ers, but secretly didn't request a trade for fear of backlash? I mean, who knows? Honestly, Woj was carrying a lot of water for Harden and his agents. On February 10th, 2022, James Harden was officially dealt to the Philadelphia 76ers in a blockbuster deal flipped for another problem star, Ben Simmons, and a handful of other pieces. Once again, James finds himself on the precipice. He's in a fantastic basketball situation alongside Joel Embiid and a strong supporting cast, in a near perfect position to challenge for and win an elusive NBA championship. But James Harden's career has been, in a word, mesmerizing, both for the individual numbers and accolades he's accrued, and for the manner in which his teams have routinely fallen short in the playoffs. This could finally be the moment in time in which Harden pushes through to compete for a championship, but man, what if it isn't?